Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. My name is Madison and this is Madiswan Reads. Thank you so much for being here. Today I'm going to be coming to you with my July wrap-up, my very first monthly wrap-up. I am super excited to talk about all of the books that I read this month and hopefully you enjoy. But before I start, just a quick little disclaimer. I am not the speediest reader and I don't really have the time to read like a massive amount of books in 1 month, and I'm lucky if I get in like 6 or 7. So if you see that I don't have as many books in my wrap-up as maybe some other booktubers do, please don't be disappointed. I am just doing my best to read stories that I enjoy and share them with you all. Alright, so the first book that I read in the month of July was Vicious by V.E. Schwab. And as I mentioned, I think in my very first video, Vicious follows these two college students, Victor and Eli. They're very close friends, they live together, and they're each kind of drawn together because they sense like a darkness in the other. Like that's a very big theme of the book. But anyway, so they decide to embark on this project of trying to create a superhero, or an EO as they call it, an extraordinary human. But when they do this experiment, it goes a bit wrong, and everything just kind of descends into chaos from there. So I actually ended up giving Vicious 4 stars. I really loved just like the dark atmosphere of all of it. I didn't know too much about it going in, so it definitely got a lot darker than I was expecting, but in a very good way. And especially the characterization that V.E. Schwab uses throughout Vicious especially is absolutely wonderful. None of the characters in the novel are good people. Like, most of them are pretty bad people, but I found myself rooting for them anyway, which was absolutely like shocking to take a step back from and look at, but it just speaks to how wonderful her characterization is and how much detail she put into writing these characters and how much complexity. So I absolutely loved this story. I thought that the vibes were off the charts, very much dark academia. So if you like the idea of like superheroes paired with like dark academia, you should definitely pick up Vicious by V.E. Schwab. And before I go into the next book, my computer has started hissing at me again, so if you hear that, please disregard. I am so sorry about that. But aside from that, the next book that I read this month was actually a short story collection called The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans. And I was so taken aback by this book. I don't normally pick up short story collections, they're not really my thing, and I've never really gravitated towards them. I don't really know why, but I've just never felt drawn to them. However, this book was incredible. I think I gave it a 4.5 stars. It was just so good. Essentially, it's a collection of short stories featuring around the experience of being Black, and in most cases being a Black woman, and it was just so informative and so like thought-provoking. I just couldn't stop thinking about the stories. Like when I would take a break from reading them, I wanted to go back into another, and I would just highly recommend this collection. It is absolutely amazing. So the next book that I finished for the month of July was Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, and I was honestly a little worried that I wasn't going to get this chonker finished in time, but I did. So essentially what this story is it is a retelling of the Rumpelstiltskin fairy tale, but Novik puts her own interesting spin on it. It follows Miriam, who lives in a small village with her family, and her father is a moneylender. However, he's not a very good moneylender because he's way too nice to people. He lets them defer their payments, he doesn't collect their payments, and he doesn't collect the amount that he's owed when he does. So Miriam decides to take over for her father, and she gains a lot of prowess as a moneylender. She's well respected and even feared by some members of the town, until one day she makes the boast that she can turn silver into gold. And this attracts a bit of darker magic her way, and gets her into a kind of bargain that she can't really find her way out of. And I don't want to say much more than that, even though the story is so much more complex. We're not just following Miriam's point of view, we're following a bunch of different characters. We're following a Tsar, we're following an old handmaiden, we're following a young girl and her brothers from Miriam's village. So there are definitely a lot of different perspectives that make the story into what it is and make it really interesting. And as I mentioned in my first video, I really enjoyed this book. I had a good time with it. I love a good fairy tale retelling, and I liked that it wasn't too close to the original. I could definitely pick out elements of the original story, but it wasn't repetitive, and it didn't feel like something that I had heard before. So I ended up giving this 4 stars, and I would definitely recommend it to any of you fantasy lovers out there, any fairy tale fans, or just anyone who's looking for a fun and wintry read. This next book is the holy grail of all of the books that I have read this month. It is potentially one of my all-time favorites, and I loved it so much that I actually had to go out and buy myself a copy before I even returned it to the library. And that is My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You That She's Sorry by Frederick Bachman. So as I'm sure you can tell, I gave this book 5 stars. And in this story, we're following a little girl named Elsa, who is 7 years old, and her grandmother. And Elsa and her grandmother are the best of friends. They get into all kinds of trouble together and go on wild adventures, and they've even created their own fairy tale kingdom together that they escape to every night, with all of these magical creatures and stories of their own along with it. However, all of this fun and adventure sort of comes to a screeching halt when Elsa's grandma dies unexpectedly. And upon her death, Elsa's grandma has left her a bundle of letters that she must deliver to different people in the building that they both lived in. And as she sort of delivers these letters and navigates the stories of the people that she's giving the letters to, she realizes that the world that she and her grandmother had crafted together perhaps isn't as close to reality as she thought it was. So, as I'm sure you can tell by the synopsis, this book was absolutely heartbreaking. I cried so many times while reading this. I was crying by chapter 4, as I've already mentioned. It's beautiful and it's heartbreaking, and just the depictions of like family dynamics, and especially the relationship between Elsa and her grandmother, is just so beautiful. I highly recommend this to anyone who is looking for a good story. It's funny, it's sad, it's adorable, and I just absolutely cannot recommend it enough. The next book that I read this month is actually a sequel to one that I mentioned previously, and that is Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. And I really can't say too much of what this is about without sort of giving away the ending of the first, but let me just say that I loved this even more than the first book. So these two are actually in the villains duology, so it is only these two books in the series. And this one was just so fast-paced and so tense all the way through. I absolutely raced through it just to get to the end and see what was going to happen. And it really stayed with that theme of darkness, but also deep characterization. I was even more enthralled with the characters than I was the first time, and I found myself caring more and more what happened to them. Even characters who I didn't like in the first book, my feelings about them sort of shifted against my will almost, which just speaks volumes to how complex and confusing these characters are. But again, I would highly, highly recommend this duology. It's so fun, and it's so puzzling and so dark. It's just, it's a heck of a ride altogether. So the final book that I read this month, see, I warned you that there weren't going to be very many. The final book that I read this month was Wow, No Thank You by Samantha Irby. And this is essentially a nonfiction collection of essays about Samantha Irby's life. They're all very funny, very comedic, and I discovered while I was reading that she only lives an hour away from where I live in Michigan. She mentioned like some of the same places that I've been. She mentioned flying out of airports that I go to every time I have to go back to school, which I just thought was so insane because I knew exactly what she was talking about. So that I found that so hilarious and so funny that I was absolutely able to relate to her ideas about like living in very rural Michigan. So that was a lot of fun. I really loved her sense of humor. I thought that she was so great. Her writing style was excellent, very comedic, and I just really enjoyed this book. I had a fun time. I actually read it at work when we weren't busy, so that was super fun and super entertaining, and I would definitely highly recommend it. I think I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And with that, we have completed the first ever wrap up on Madiswan Reads. Thank you all so much again for being here. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about my July reads. And please just like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what your favorite read of July was. I'm dying to know. I have this little stack here myself, which actually needs to go back to the library pretty soon. I should check the dates on that. But anyway, yeah, thank you so much for coming. And I hope you enjoyed. Bye!